Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders podcast. I'm your host, Addison Galambos. We often discuss the path to mastery, and for many, that path leads directly to Japan. My guest today didn't just go to Japan, he stayed. I'm thrilled to welcome Mooney to the show. Kaya completed a rigorous 5-year apprenticeship at Kouka-en and is now navigating the transition to becoming a professional while in Japan with his family. We're going to talk about the cultural immersion, the surprising challenges of doing bonsai in the bonsai capital of the world, and the truly intangible benefits you gain from being steeped in Japanese culture. Welcome, Kaya.
Thank you, Addison. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you today, and I'm looking to diving into a lot of fun topics and getting into it.
Yeah, it was awesome seeing you whenever you were on your tour through the US and catching up, and made me very excited for some of the topics we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, me too. It was great to see you as well.
So, I guess, do you want to give folks a little bit of a history of kind of your journey in bonsai and, how the last 6 years have been for you being in Japan?
Sure. Do you want me to go into kind of like how I got into bonsai or just since I've
Yeah,
been
I
in
think that'd be
Japan, more or
interesting. I think
less?
it would also be interesting for people to hear about the level of experience you had when you got to Japan.
Sure. So basically, how I got into bonsai, my first exposure to it was from my grandfather. He was a comic book artist and fine artist by profession, but he also had an antique store and just kind of had a knack for, picking up odds and ends. And there was always various Japanese antiques and kind of art and things around our house. And one day when I was pretty young, I don't remember exactly when he bought these, but he brought home a bunch of old bonsai journals from a garage sale. He went to a garage sale somewhere like in Florida where I grew up, and he brought home all these old bonsai magazines and journals. And I think there were a couple books, maybe Japanese books or English translated Japanese books in the mix. And I found those and kind of dismissed it at first because I thought it was just like not something that a young boy could reach. I think I was around 12 or 13 the first time I saw the books, and the idea was just kind of so foreign and out there that I just thought it wasn't something that I could really grasp at the time. But that kind of left an impression on me, and it definitely piqued my first interest in it. And then I think I found those books again after my grandfather had passed away, and we were moving around some stuff we had in like storage at my parents' house. And I was probably around like 14 or 15 at that time, and little by little kind of like got into it. I think I bought some random, like procumbens, junipers at a garden center and tried to mess around with those, and fell out little by little, kind of got back into it. And then when I was around like 16, 17, I found an actual bonsai nursery that was near my parents' house. So I started to go there, to get material and kind of get close with the owner. It was a place called Dragon Tree Bonsai in Palm City, Florida, and the owner's name was Robert Pender. So I would go there, take classes. I joined the local club that we had, which was not very active. There would be like maybe 5 to 10 members on a really good day at some of the meetings. So it was a pretty small club, but they were all very kind to me. And I would, continue taking those classes at the nursery. And eventually, while I was in college, actually, I was going there so much, and the guy reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do kind of like a summer job, like work a few days a week in between my classes. So I went out there for one summer, kind of worked for him. When my classes picked up, I couldn't continue to work there, but I would still go out there to learn and kind of just take in the bonsai nursery environment. So that was kind of the initial jump into bonsai was through that.
What were
And
you
then
studying at school?
I was originally studying to do like a IT work, basically.
Huh, okay.
So I was studying at like a small state college that was kind of near to my hometown. And I just did my associate's degree, and eventually through, various connections, I met Boone, who's based out in California, And at that point, like I was pretty sure that I wanted to try and figure out how to make a living with bonsai. I wasn't sure the path that was going to take. I wasn't sure if it was going to be financially successful at all. I'm still not quite sure about that one, but I knew that I wanted to do it every day, whether it was as a living or a very rigorous hobby or just something that I wanted it to engulf my life, basically, one way or another. And I met Boone at a Bonsai Societies of Florida, the BSF convention, I guess about like 8 or 9 years ago now, about 8.5, 9 years ago. And, I kind of expressed all this to him when I met him when we were having dinner. And I said, I'd like to go to Japan, but at that point I was 20. I didn't have a passport. I had never left the country, so it was a bit of a jump to do that from that point, I think. So I expressed this to him, and he said, "Hey, if you want to, I have one apprentice now. If you would like to, you can come out to California, do kind of like a trial period for a week or two." I went out there. It worked out, and I studied with Boone for about a year and a half. And then through other connections, I was put in contact with Owen Reich, who was a former apprentice at Kouka-en. So he kind of helped me get in contact with Kouka-en. So from that point, I went over to Japan basically. So that was kind of my introduction to bonsai and how I got over to Japan
Oh,
in a
cool.
nutshell, I guess.
I have a question.
Of
Whenever you
course.
got to Japan, like how well prepared did you feel like you were for the apprenticeship? That's something that I think about in my own practice a lot is like getting to a level of like technique in terms of wiring or, different like repotting or whatever that would be equivalent to someone starting an apprenticeship or like getting through an apprenticeship. So I'm curious like how you felt you were prepared whenever you got over there. Were you able to start wiring stuff or were you starting at the ground up? I'm curious how that was.
I mean, I think there were some things that I felt I wouldn't say that I could do them technically at like a high level, but I felt decently prepared, on the first day for certain things. Like I felt a little bit more comfortable with repotting, for example. I felt a little bit more comfortable with like pulling needles and some very basic fundamental tasks, important tasks, but basic fundamental tasks. But definitely, like, I felt like at that point I knew how to put the wire on the tree, but I did not know what to do with it at that point. Like, talking about when I first arrived in Japan, my first year and whatnot. So, yeah, there were definitely some gaps, but I think a lot of the Japanese teachers, they are somewhat used to that because, if you look at the apprenticeship model in Japan regarding bonsai, at least on a traditional aspect, what generally happened was you would have bonsai family A and then you have bonsai family B. These two people would essentially like trade their eldest son to go be an apprentice with the other family, and then they would come back to run their nursery. So, in a lot of cases, these people, they didn't have like a natural interest for bonsai or something like that. They were just kind of thrown into it because it was the family business. So, I've talked to like some, Japanese professionals that said when they started that come from these multi generational family nurseries, that when they started their nurseries, or their apprenticeships at the nurseries, they didn't even know the names for the species or what some of the techniques are called or things like that. So I think most of the teachers in Japan are pretty understanding and lenient in the very beginning because of that. Having a foreigner come over, of course, in most cases there's going to be a language barrier, but they're eager to learn and they do understand some of these techniques, and maybe they've studied the vocabulary in Japanese for at least the bonsai related terms and things like that. So yeah, I think you know they're kind of used to someone not knowing much from the very beginning, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that in the context of, a lot of the people starting as apprenticeships traditionally would be very young and hadn't had any bonsai exposure. So
Yeah.
I was super impressed by whenever we were doing that tour earlier this year, I guess, of Gafuten. Your Japanese was excellent, and it was really fun to be able to make deep connections with folks through you. Can
Oh, it's
you,
far from excellent.
Jozu? Uh, could you, could you, like, when did that happen? And I'm hoping you could also go into a little bit more detail of like what your apprenticeship looked like, the arc of your learning throughout your 5 years, both for the
Language.
language as well as the language and then also the bonsai
Yeah.
skills too.
So I'll touch on the language first since we were speaking about that. I would say the first year was definitely the most difficult. I felt like just when you can't make basic communication, you just feel very lonely. Like even if you're surrounded by people every day, you just feel very lonely and kind of like exiled. And not because people are being mean to you or because they're treating you differently, just because you can't understand what's happening sometimes. So that can be very frustrating. And I studied, some basic stuff before I got to Japan, but definitely not enough. Like if I whenever people message me and they're talking about wanting to go to Japan now, one recommendation I always have for people is like study Japanese. Like take a course, audit a night class at a college or something, whatever you can do to immerse yourself a little bit more before you get there because it completely changes your experience, like when you can understand not just visually and physically what's happening, but from what people are actually saying, it completely changes your experience just coming here to visit, or especially if you come here planning to spend 5 to 6 years as like an apprentice. So I think one thing that really helped me, I guess around my second and a half or third year, I think second and a half, we had a young Japanese guy who was in college at the time and he wanted to come be an apprentice. And, since he was under me, the way the apprenticeship system works is of course, your teacher, your oyakata does teach you some stuff, but a lot of it you're expected to learn from the higher up apprentices. So I was put in a position where like I had to, answer this guy's questions and help him and, guide him down the right path and all those things in Japanese. He didn't speak any English. So that was difficult at first, but it definitely helped because I was forced to speak more, where a lot of time the relationship between like apprentice and teacher, apprentice and oyakata, as we say, there's a lot of hierarchy in Japan. So it's a lot more listening than speaking in certain cases, a lot of taking orders and commands and just saying like, yes, yes, I
Yeah, there's a
understand.
definite
Okay.
like power balance difference. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that helped me out a lot, definitely. And I think, I had an interest to communicate and just if I was going to spend time in Japan, like after I finished the apprenticeship, that was even more important. So a lot of it just self-studying. Like I never took any classes. I do have a couple like college Japanese textbooks that I've used very little, actually.
Yeah, that makes
But
sense. Well, you definitely managed to get very good. It was really impressive seeing you. So, give me the arc of the actual like technical skills for bonsai too. I'm curious as to like, were you wiring trees your first year? When did you feel like you were hitting those milestones of like, oh, I can technically do wire, I can do exhibition wire, I can style a tree, I can work on these species. I'm curious like where you felt you were hitting those big milestones and maybe even what you think those milestones are.
I feel like around the 2.5 kind of 3 year mark was when I really started to kind of get stuff. Like it felt a little more intuitive to just wire the trees and decide like this branch is going to be here. And I didn't have to think about stuff quite as much. I mean, you still have to think about things, when you're wiring a tree or doing any sort of bonsai work, but at that point, things started to feel a little bit more natural. And I think after that point, there was still a lot of learning to do, of course, but a lot of it falls more into repetition based learning than like these big kind of hills and humps that you're getting over. So I'd say that that first like year was when you kind of had the most like aha moments where you're just like, oh, okay, I didn't understand that. And now I kind of understand that at least a base level, if not a higher level than I did before. And I think around that 2.5 to 3 year mark was when things just kind of fell into place and it was a lot more natural feeling to what I was doing, basically.
That makes sense. So, what would you say were the big milestones too, or like aha moments? Are there specific things that you're like, oh, my teacher leveled me up and let me style trees alone once I was able to do this or demonstrate something in this manner? Curious, like if
So
you
what
had any of those throughout your apprenticeship.
what I was always told by the senior apprentice, Naoki, is, in the beginning he would let us wire trees pretty actively, which was nice because some nurseries they don't let you do that as quick. Like you have to do a lot of menial tasks, pulling needles, cleaning, that sort of thing, your first year or so. And that existed at Kouka-en too. If you were the bottom guy, you had to clean the toilets and dump out the ashtrays and stuff. But we still did get to wire in between all that kind of stuff, which was really nice. So in the beginning, he gave us kind of, I hate to say this, but they would probably be considered nice bonsai material in the US, but what would be considered like kind of junk trees in Japan. So stuff that maybe had structural errors, and it was never going to be like super high quality, valuable bonsai in most cases. A lot of cheap, like field grown white pines and things like that. And those would be kind of like our lesson trees, as he would call it. So it was basically expected, like in worst case scenario, if you really messed up, it's not that much of a loss for him. Because, sometimes if you're moving branches a lot on a tree and you're not just wiring it and setting it exactly where it needs to be, that could cause small branches to die, that sort of thing. So we would work on this lesson material. And I was always told if you do a really good job, 3 trees in a row, that's when you get to kind of like upgrade to slightly better material. Definitely part of upping your skills is working on good material too, being able to study the structure it has and seeing what really makes a good tree, that kind of helps with your, the technical aspect of wiring and shaping the tree as well, I think. So that's what I was always told. And once I did kind of get those 3 trees down, like it wasn't just about doing a good job, it was also about doing a good job in the eye of your teacher, like to his aesthetic profile, how he wants things to be done. Let's say some nurseries, they prefer when there is like a large branch on this side of the tree leading that way and the apex is going that way and that sort of thing. That can be said for this nursery, maybe not for this nursery. So, kind of dialing in that aesthetic profile to meet with what he likes as well was what was considered doing like a quote unquote good job, basically.
Yeah, you can't necessarily be avant-garde and do your own style as an apprentice, right?
Y-
Like that's not really how it works.
No, it's not. And I'm sure some people try that, but I don't think you're really going to learn much that way as well. So it's better to just. The best way to learn art is to copy the basics first, and then, whether you call bonsai an art or a craft, that doesn't really matter. But any sort of craft, art, anything that's technically skilled, copy the basics from someone else, and then once you're in a comfortable position, then you can, kind of go outside of the box a little bit, and you always have a safety net to fall back on in the situations where you don't know what to do.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. That makes a lot of sense. And you don't know what you're changing if you haven't done it correctly, right? So
Yeah.
uh, that makes a lot of sense. So this is something that I wonder about. Is like you've gotten your certificate in Japan from the Nippon Bonsai Association, right? And does that denote mastery of bonsai? What do you think that like what expectations should be set for someone who has that certificate in terms of like capabilities?
Um, hmm. I mean, essentially, it's just a piece of paper that says I was at this place for 5 years. That's really all it is. So I think that differs from person to person. As long as you're actively learning and taking the apprenticeship seriously, then yeah, it should be a reflection of your skill and that you learned something of technical value during those 5 years. For me, I dropped out of college to do bonsai for a living. So I never really got that diploma from college. So for me, it was a big accomplishment just to have something like that. But yeah, as long as you're taking the apprenticeship seriously, then it's a reflection of your skill, I think, in most cases, at least.
Yeah, I guess I mean more in the context of like assuming someone took the same rigor as you going through their program and got the experiences that you got, in 5 years or six, they should be able to get fairly good at bonsai. But I'm curious, like, what do you think, like, relative to, tenured professionals, would you say that someone that's gone through this and gone through it well, like, are they I guess like what's the standard to be a professional in Japan that you think comes along with that 5 to 6 years of work? Like, do you feel like you're fully equipped to be a professional and go out on your own and create awesome bonsai of the highest caliber where you're at now? Obviously, we all want to continue to learn, but I'm just curious, like, what does that 5 years represent in terms of like the pursuit of mastery of bonsai in your mind? It's kind of a tough
I mean,
question, but
I think I'm comfortable in my skill set, but I think if you're really trying to be a professional or a master of something, I think the definition of that is, accepting when there's something you could be better at or learn more about and always trying to improve your skills. So like I don't think I don't think you should get to just like a baseline after your apprenticeship and that's where you stay. I think there's going to be some up and down movement to some degree. And if I compare like myself or anyone else who's recently apprenticed or finished their apprenticeship to a Japanese professional that's been doing it for the past 10, 20, 30 years, there's going to be a lot of differences, whether you're talking about technical skill or knowledge of display and various other niche things that, exist in the bonsai world. So, yeah, I think it shows that you should have a baseline technical skill that's different depending on the nursery you studied at, but you still need to actively study and improve yourself from that point forward, at least. That's how I feel about it, at least.
That makes sense. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of it in the context of for my own practice, like I wish there was a set of standards that you could hit where it's like, okay, like yes, it's going to take me a longer time period to get to those standards, but like or I might not have the breadth of someone who studied in Japan, right? Of species, for example. But oh, there are these qualifications that you can check off for like the minimum bar to reach some sort of milestone in your bonsai career, right? And so I don't know that that exists, but that's why I was kind of asking that question to kind of suss out if you felt yeah, I guess milestones or like technical capabilities. Like I'm able to take a tree from early to late stage development for a multitude of species, or I'm able to do exhibition quality wiring or things like that. Maybe it's not an easy question to answer, but sorry.
I I no, I don't think it yeah, it is a little bit of a difficult question to answer, but it's a good question. I think part of the hard part with that is, with bonsai being living things and a lot of the progression that goes along with them, it needs time. So it's like it's not linear in the sense of like you can change the design or improve something on a tree from day to day to day. Like, yes, there are a lot of little tasks that go into, caring for these things, keeping them healthy, keeping them alive, making sure they're pest free, doing the appropriate seasonal tasks. But it's not like you can just wire a tree or shape it or something and then I need to improve on this. Let's do it again the next day, So a lot of these things, it's like you might be improving, but, unless you go back and look at these photos that you hopefully are taking whenever you work on your trees and you see the progression from like year to year to year, it's a very slow progression. So, I
Mm,
mean, I think it's important to remind people to like look if you're learning how to wire or you're learning how to cut branches or you're learning how to shape a tree or grow something, whatever it is, go back to the first time you tried to do it, whether that was a year ago or 6 years ago or 10 years ago, and look at the differences between those, the wiring mistakes or how you tied the tree into the pot when you were repotting it, or how far you cut back a branch to the trunk line, how you put the cut paste on, like all those little things. If you can see those on like a greater scale from, the vantage point of like years or months or whatever it is, I think you can see those progression points, hopefully, as long as you're, applying yourself well.
yeah, that makes sense. I love that. I think it's best to actually take a step back and be like, hey, bonsai aren't made in a day. Even if you can, wire up a tree and have it look really nice, like that's great. But to make an exhibition quality tree, you have to do that for the next 5 years or whatever, or
Yeah.
keep that development going. So that makes sense. I guess during your apprenticeship, and this kind of gets into a little bit of like, why is Japan the best place to learn bonsai? You get access to a lot of spectacular material and material in different stages, and there's just like a bigger pipeline of experiences. But I'm curious on your thoughts on like coming from learning in the US to learning in Japan, like why is it different?
I will say, I think that Taiwan is also like a very interesting place to study bonsai if you're interested in tropicals or a lot of broadleaf evergreens and deciduous and stuff like that. I don't really know anything about going to apprentice there, so I don't know how common it is. But in Japan, at least, it's been done for a very long time, this whole apprenticeship thing. The bonsai thing has also been done for a long time, but they have a system in place for you know how long an apprenticeship is, how they're going to be treated, like how you're going to go into the professional bonsai community afterwards for a Japanese person that's going to stay and live here and open up a nursery. So I think just because they kind of have that system pretty well oiled and figured out, so I think that makes for a very good learning process at least. But I mean, the trees are just beautiful. They've been doing it for such a long time, so it's really amazing that you can study all of these trees in different stages, whether they're starting out from seedlings or cuttings at certain nurseries, or all the way to the beautiful exhibition quality trees that you'll see in the Kokufu or the Taikon tent.
That makes sense. Did did you have any trouble kind of adjusting your American aesthetic or design principles to the Japanese kind of approach? Or maybe you didn't have as opinionated a form. But yeah, I'm curious if you ran into anything where you're like, it was a little bit harder for you to intuitively grasp because of cultural differences.
I don't think I had anything that I had to like, change taste wise or aesthetics because I didn't like them or something like that. But I definitely saw the trees that I was attracted to and the trees that I gravitated towards little by little over like the 5 years of my apprenticeship change. Some of that being influenced directly from my teacher and his taste, some of that just being the overall Japanese aesthetic and kind of having, not always, there are a lot of strong, very visually in your face, like kind of loud trees in Japan. But I think there is a subtle taste for trees that are a little bit quieter. Trees that, you kind of have to study for a minute to see all of the beauty that they have. It's not something that is just in your face. Like the tree definitely captivates you, it definitely captures you when you see it from across the room, but there's maybe some beautiful live vein twisting or deadwood or whatever it is that's kind of hiding under the foliage. And it creates this subtle, quiet design that is very intricate and very Japanese. Sometimes I'll look back at trees that I liked, for example, when I was living in Florida. Grow a lot of like tropical stuff there, and that was kind of how I first got into bonsai. It's not really my preference nowadays, nothing against it. I just kind of drifted more towards the conifers and deciduous trees that you see commonly in Japan. But I'll look back at some of these photos that I had saved or cut out maybe from magazines, and I don't remember what I was thinking when I saved some of these photos, but of course at the time that was what I thought was the most beautiful thing in the world, and that's why I saved it to my phone or cut it out of a magazine or whatever, because I wanted to look at it again and reference it. And some of those trees I still do like, but overall, the tastes are very, very different from the trees that I'm attracted to nowadays. And that's definitely a reflection of, having spent this time in Japan and those tastes subtly shifting year by year, I think.
Yeah, there's almost an acquired taste aspect to
Definitely. Yeah.
a certain type of tree, and then yeah, you have to see beautiful examples of those, and you have to know people that appreciate them to be able to gain that, right? And in Japan, you're just going to have such a deeper level of understanding of bonsai and the art because they just have more examples of them, and they have a longer history of appreciating them, right?
Yeah, like one thing that I really found myself being attracted to after I came to Japan was bunjin style trees. I don't think I appreciated them enough until I came to Japan. And one thing that's definitely, it doesn't come across well in photos or magazines or whatever is the fact that most of these bunjin trees, yes, they are slender. Yes, they are, quite skinny and they're not as thick and prominent as something like a gigantic black pine or a collected juniper or something of that sort. But they are very tall. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't quite understand. Like you'll see these trees in the US where it's like, maybe 10 inches to a foot and a half or something like that. And it's just a skinny little trunk. And people will call it like a bunjin tree. And that's not really what like a bunjin tree is. You have to have this kind of story of struggle and harmony and surviving and all these things at play, and also having that height to it kind of makes up visually for what it's lacking in width and girth. So it still has that striking visual weight from being so tall. It still kind of draws you into it. So that was something that I was definitely not as attracted to before I came to Japan. And those trees, they're almost kind of like palate cleansers in Japan. It's the dish that you have in between dishes to prepare you for the next one because you have all of these big badass trees at the Kokofu and they're fantastic, but they're visually very heavy. And when you see thousands of these trees, you see a lot of these same design elements at play. Yes, the trees themselves are different, but they're all in the same shape and size pot. They all have just a ton of foliage on them and they're beautiful. They're amazing, but they're more similar than different, if that makes sense. They're all very
Yeah.
different in
Yeah,
their own
yeah.
regard, but they're more similar than they are different. So you have these bunjin trees, placed throughout the exhibition, and maybe they're just at gardens on the side. They have like a nice summer display where it's a very slender tree and some grass or something like that. And they kind of help, cleanse your palate a little bit. They kind of help you take a deep breath, pause, and focus on that tree for a little bit before you go to the next tree. So that was something I definitely have appreciated a lot more since being in Japan, I think, is those slender bunjin trees.
That makes sense. Very cool. So, what else did you fall in love with in Japan? Because you're staying there now. So, I'm very curious about that because I think a lot of people, or like the default model would be like you go to Japan as an apprentice for an apprentice, and then you go back to your home country to start a business or something like that. So, walk us through how.
Well, that was my plan, but thankfully I met my wife and we have a daughter now named Skylar. She's a year and 3 months. My wife and I have some family in Japan, so we decided to stay in Japan, at least another year or so, just to kind of allow our daughter to soak up the culture and hopefully get some more of the language down eventually when she starts like preschool and just spend more time with family. That was kind of like the main thought behind it. Thankfully, I'm in a position where I can travel to do work. I go to the US usually about like 4 or 5 times a year. I've gone to Europe and South America to do bonsai work as well. So it doesn't create too many financial hurdles right now. I really like being in Japan. It's just, it's a great country, but I think we will move back to the US eventually. I would like to set up a garden and build a business. So that's something that I think will happen in the next year to 2 years maximum, something of that sort. But still, just kind of enjoying Japan a little bit. I always
Yeah.
had like a something on my bucket list because I knew what Kokufu series we were on when I came over here to do an apprenticeship. And inside my head, I always told myself like I want to stay in Japan until the 100th Kokufu. Like I thought that would be kind of a fun benchmark of my time here, basically. So that goal is coming up very soon, as you know.
Fast
So
approaching. Yep.
I'll have to reassess after that point.
That makes sense. But yeah, for now you're had a really successful start to your kind of professional career and things are good. So why make a change? How has it been? I mean, what percentage of your work is like Japanese clients versus doing things internationally, or I guess like local work versus global work?
I mean, the 90% of it, well, not 90%, but the majority of it is, international work, like when I'm traveling, going to work with clients in the States and other countries. I do have some trees that I keep with a friend here and a few trees that I keep on my porch of my apartment actually. So I'll, basically go to auctions and buy stuff to wire and kind of sell that to customers in Japan, sell it on like auctions online. And then I also there's another nursery that I was friendly with during my apprenticeship close by in Osaka. And he reached out to me and asked if I could do some work for him. So, kind of in between traveling stints when I have a little extra time in Japan, I'll go there, anywhere from a week to 2, 3 weeks a month, basically, if I have the time for it. So, either way, I'm pretty full. I have a decent amount of like free time when I get back from the trips because I'm just kind of beat and need to recover after working every day for like 3, 4 weeks. But other than that, I'm staying pretty busy, whether I'm outside Japan or in Japan for the most part.
That makes sense. Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Have you thought about where in the US you might want to set down roots in the future?
Yes, I have, you know, originally I thought about going somewhere on the East Coast because it would be nice to be close to my family and find a climate that's close enough to Japan. So I thought about places like Tennessee, like in the Nashville area, I thought about North Carolina and Georgia for a bit as well. Recently, I've been thinking about the St. Louis area a little bit. I'm not 100% sure on that yet. It seems a lot more affordable than other parts of the country currently. So I think, the move for myself and my family is definitely going to be a big financial hurdle to get over. So if I can kind of set things up for a little bit lower cost as far as the house and the nursery, that would be very beneficial. The one thing I'm a little bit worried about, when you kind of head out into the Midwest, like areas like St. Louis and the surrounding states and towns, is it's definitely a little bit colder than places like Georgia, for example. So, where I studied in Osaka, it's a very mild climate. Like we would freeze a few times a year, but it was pretty rare. We would get like a very, very light dusting of snow. So we didn't have to do much to protect the trees while I was an apprentice. Like things that were headed for the exhibitions, we'd put them inside so they stay greener. Things that were really, really weak, we would put them inside just to help them out a little bit. Before I was there, Naoki told me that sometimes some of the trees would get like wrapped with blankets to insulate. I don't know if that was just to protect the pots from cracking or to actually protect the roots. But while I was there, it was for the most part like pretty hot winters. So we never had to do much. So I know if I pick somewhere like St. Louis, it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, figuring out how to keep those trees healthy throughout the winter. That's not something I've had to do ever with bonsai as long as I've been doing it. I've been in mostly somewhat mild climates. So that would definitely be a little bit of an adjustment, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, it's hopefully something you can learn from. I mean, anywhere you go that's a new climate, there'll be those idiosyncrasies or those like
Yeah.
differences, right? I think winter is an especially difficult one, but hopefully you'll be able to get guidance from practitioners in that area too, right? Of like, how have you been doing this the last 30 years that you've been growing bonsai here? So it shouldn't be insurmountable, right?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I have a lot of clients and friends in the area that have kind of pointed me in the right direction. Like, I get the gist of what I have to do. I think it's more just the not having to have done that before. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, kind of, to deal with that. Anything like that where you add things that kind of waste your time, they take away from the bonsai, take away from the family a little bit, but
That's true.
I don't
So
think it's
yeah,
the
I
word.
get it. I get what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah. It reduces the efficiency of the operation for sure. Right? When you're spending time on things that aren't value add
I
to the
also just
trees.
want to make sure that things are like aesthetically pleasing too. Like I don't want to just
Mm,
shove trees into a hoop house and call it a day. Like I'd like to, if I pick somewhere like that, build a nice greenhouse where trees can still be spread out for airflow and also just so they can be appreciated while they're like in the storage. I know if I want to do that right, it's going to be it'll be a pretty big job.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Or maybe just put facades on a few sides of it that face the rest of the garden.
That would work too.
Yeah.
I'll have to bring you out for some help, Addison.
Yeah, I'll come out. That sounds fun. I am really interested in greenhouses, though I don't need one here in San Francisco, obviously.
That
That's
is
cool.
true.
So,
But
something we talked a little bit about whenever you were here that I wanted to revisit a little bit is I expressed a challenge with sometimes knowing that something's wrong with the design, but not necessarily knowing how to fix it. And also the idea of like, as you learn more, you start to have these kind of glasses that come off. I want to kind of ask you about, what was that experience like during your apprenticeship? How did you start to develop taste, I guess? And yeah, just any like stories or thoughts that you have on how that process was for you within the apprenticeship system.
so I think the taste that I have is mostly a reflection from what my teacher likes, and then also from what my senpai or senior apprentice Naoki likes. I definitely like a lot of those kind of bunjin trees came from Naoki's taste, and as far as like general aesthetics, how the branches were set, wired, angle of the trunk when you're repotting, what pots to use, that kind of stuff mostly came from my teacher. And yeah, I think it's just a matter of, finding these things. And as long as you think they're beautiful, even if you don't fully understand them at the time, you eventually get to a point where it kind of clicks and just copying that until that moment happens. But I definitely think you need to have some sort of kind of inherent sense. I think that sense can be developed slightly, and it's okay if you don't quite understand why something feels wrong. But, an example that I like to give sometimes is One day when Naoki was coming back to help out with something at the nursery, I was working on this shimpaku and I styled it all out and I was pretty much done, just doing like some minor kind of tweaks and adjustments at the very end. And I think I looked a little upset or distraught. Maybe I was making a few noises and he kind of overheard and he asked me, "Are you done?" And I said, "Yeah." And then he said, "Do you like it?" And I said, "No." And I wasn't there were just a couple things that were kind of off that I wasn't pleased with. It wasn't like up to my standard or what my teacher would be pleased with, is what I thought at least. And he said, "Do you know how to fix it?" And I said, "I'm not sure." But he said, "You know what's wrong?" And I said, "Yes, I know what's wrong." And he said, "That's okay. As long as you have a sense for, what feels kind of off or what feels it needs to be changed to improve the, aesthetics or the structure of the tree, whatever it may be in that particular case, that's fine. That can be taught. But if you don't have any sense or kind of inherent feeling that something is off, that is very difficult to teach. That is something you can pick it up, but I think it's something that's kind of like set within us. So, you can teach technique, but to teach that sense that something feels wrong, even though maybe textbook wise, you did everything perfectly, the branches are all laid out how they need to be, but this one needs to be a little bit higher, this one needs to be a little bit lower, this one needs to be thinned out slightly. Those things can be very difficult to put on paper, I think, and teach textbook wise. It's good to have the ability to just kind of feel that sometimes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can definitely relate with the you finish a tree and then you're like, oh man, it's not right. Something's wrong. For my first like few years, I would kind of stop at that point and be like, all right, I need help from someone.
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to get a little bit of training wheels where it's like, okay, something's wrong. Like I know the things that I can do to try to fix it, right? Like, oh, you know, I can shorten it or I can, move the branch up or down or to the side or to the left. And so now I'm starting to take some kind of tactical, like, okay, let me see this and then step back and see if it got better or not. But
Yeah.
I think it's hard sometimes to, like, you don't always have the things in your toolbox to solve the problem, even though you know it's there, right? And I think that comes with experience. But I think that's good advice to folks to, like, listen to that voice in your head that's saying something might not be right and you might not know how to fix it right away.
I was just very lucky that someone was there to witness it and give me advice at the exact time. I think that was probably about like 2 years into my apprenticeship, somewhere around that point. But yeah, I mean, it definitely happens. That's part of learning. People that do something for a living, they didn't always do it for a living. They were students, and even if they do it as a profession now, you're still in an ideal situation, always learning and changing your technique to improve yourself and your craft, I think. I mean, I think definitely one of the most important things is relating to bonsai, of course, but if you want to get better at something, you need to find a teacher and you need to find a teacher, not five teachers. Like, if you want to get better at bonsai, the best way to do it is to find someone whose trees you like and just study with that person. Whether you find someone else to study with 2, 3, 4 years down the road or something, that's a completely different topic. But in the beginning, it's better to just find one person and just stick with them. You will see the most upward progression and you will have the most aha moments and you will definitely learn the most that way, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's easy to say coming from Japan at one of the top professional gardens, but no, I'm just teasing. No, I mean you definitely did it right, I think, finding that experience. What part would you say that Fujikawa Koka-en plays within the greater bonsai ecosystem? Like, coming from not Japan, it's hard to like really understand how these nurseries relate to each other or like what specialties they have and things like that. So I'm curious, like, what's your perspective of Koka-en?
Well, definitely Kouka-en kind of drifts more towards, higher end kind of refined material. So while I was there for the most part, about half of the garden, more or less, was all sales trees. And then the other half of the garden was a mixture of client trees. We had a few of our like apprentice projects, in the very back, and then also kind of trees that were for sale, but technically not for sale. Like some of these were trees that my teacher's father had started or he had bought from someone and they'd been at the nursery for 40, 50 years, something like that. But let me ask you just to reiterate one more time. What was like the
Oh,
question
I'm just
exactly?
curious of like how would you relate it to like does Kouka-en focus a lot on preparing trees for like Japanese exhibitions and like clients that way, or are they like preparing high end trees for just like sales? Are they just doing it for the love of the game? Like I'm just curious of like how Kouka-en like how is it? What would you say its place is within the bonsai ecosystem? Or like what are examples of what the kind of archetypes are for Japanese bonsai nurseries?
Yeah, I mean, I would say every nursery kind of fills their own small little niche one way or another. I'd say the best way to sum it up would be everyone kind of does a different mix of the same stuff. So everyone kind of does the same stuff, but let's say you have a list of 30 ways that you can make a living doing bonsai in Japan. Everyone kind of picks like five or six of those things and they kind of specialize in that. So some places will be focused more on import export. Some places will be focused more on doing like exhibition work and they will be really adamant about sourcing, or making high-end material for these clients and finding really nice pots to pair with these trees and getting them suited up to be displayed in the Kokufu 10 or the Taikon 10 and all these exhibitions. Some places are more focused on, going to auctions, kind of sourcing material to buy and sell. Some places will essentially just maintain trees for clients. That's kind of like an old school model in Japan. Not an old school model, but to just have that as your main business, like mainly just, taking care of clients' trees and not doing much other business outside of it. So everyone kind of does a little bit of the same stuff, just in a slightly different way with a different pick of from that pool of ways to make a living with bonsai.
Oh, interesting. That's fascinating. And then I guess like depending on where they are in the country and the weather, they might have specific species that they focus on or don't focus on.
Yeah, definitely. Like in Osaka recently, well, I mean, historically, it's a little bit hotter than the northern parts of the country, but more so now it's much hotter than northern parts of the country. So certain species in Osaka, like the Azo spruce, the yews, for example, they don't do too well here, like in Osaka. So those species aren't always preferred as much in this area. And then, you can go all the way down to Okinawa, which is basically like a tropical, subtropical area in southern Japan, like one of the southern islands down there, and they have tropical species. They grow bougainvillea, they grow ficus, they grow the pemphis that they use in Taiwan and Thailand and stuff like that. So it's a pretty wide variety as far as the climate goes in Japan. That's something. Okinawa is definitely a little bit closed off. Being an island, you need to take a plane or a very, very long ferry ride to get there. So it's a little bit disconnected from the greater bonsai scene in Japan. But there are still some members that like display tropical trees at the Kokufu almost
Oh,
every year.
interesting.
So
Cool.
it is kind of neat to see those tropical trees grown like in a way that's kind of more in line with like Japanese aesthetics.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see.
What would you say? So I'm assuming that each kind of these different businesses and nurseries have their own kind of definition of quality, or how is like how would you say that what was imprinted on you as like this is what a quality bonsai is or isn't within your apprenticeship, and how would you say that like does that vary pretty widely across Japan or different nurseries, or is it fairly close just due to like economic pressure? I'm curious what your thoughts on like what is a quality bonsai as you were
It's
taught or as you think.
Definitely, it depends on the species. Different species have different characteristics. Comparing like a shimpaku to a black pine, what would make a shimpaku valuable is not going to make a black pine valuable, and so on and so forth. Um, I think trees that are valuable are pretty well established as being valuable all across the board, depending on whichever nursery you go to. The price tag that is attached to that, that is going to differ highly across the board. Different nurseries are going to be less inexpensive, or depending on what part of Japan you are, like it's very, very known in Japan that like as you get up towards Tokyo, like the Tokyo nurseries are generally speaking a little bit higher priced. As you get a little bit more south, when you go to Osaka and like the regions in southern Japan, like Kyushu and stuff like that, it's generally speaking a little bit cheaper in those areas. But yeah, I'd say generally speaking, most of the Japanese professionals will agree as far as what is like a valuable or nice piece of material.
Okay. Okay, makes sense. So I wanted to give you a chance to weigh in and get your perspective on some kind of US bonsai debates. So obviously the kind of grafting versus not grafting has been a very hot topic in the US. But I'm curious on a Japanese perspective of it. Like, is that even a debate in Japan of like whether or not to graft, you know, I mean, talking about like the core species, like, shimpaku or Japanese maple or something like that. Like, is that a question on whether or not to graft or in Japan?
Not, I mean, not really. I think it depends who you ask to some degree, but for the most part, grafting is not seen as like this kind of, you know, political topic.
Transmutation of the tree. Yeah, got
Yeah,
it.
it's just like okay, we have popcorn ceiling in our house, so we're going to take it down and put something that's not popcorn ceiling. Like people are not going to debate that. It's like this is ugly and hard to maintain. This one is not. So I think it's not really even seen as a debate. It's just like, does this improve the tree? Yes. Okay, let's do it. That being said, you will still see some, for example, like junipers that maybe they are very old historical trees and they were owned by someone famous in the past, whatever the reason may be. That depends on the tree. But sometimes these trees will stay the original leaf type. Like, for example, the famous juniper that Mr. Kimura has in his garden, like the
Torio no
rise.
mai or
Yes, yeah, that one. The one
yeah.
that's always kind of like front and center there.
Hmm.
Oh, that tree, for example. Have you been to Mr. Kimoto's
Hmm.
garden before? Okay.
Yep.
So maybe you saw that tree in person. Like the first time I saw it, at least, the foliage type is a lot larger than I expected, actually. Like that's not like an Itogawa type. I think it's like a Tohoku juniper or some other type of leaf type from the northern part of Japan. Last time I went there, he said that basically he kind of wanted to make that tree quickly to display it in the Sakufu ten when he was like a younger professional. And that was a reflection of that. And I think it just kind of like became such a prominent tree that it just stayed that way. So there
Oh,
are
that's
some
funny.
trees, I don't know the full story on that. That last part, like it becoming a prominent tree and just staying that way, that's just kind of my assumption. I know he did, keep the tree that leaf type so that he could show it in the Sakufu more quickly. Whereas if you were to graft it, you would add a bit more time onto that. The second part about it, maybe staying that way just because it became a prominent tree, that part's just kind of my assumption there. But there definitely are some trees you'll see like that throughout Japan where they just stayed that way for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So I don't think you need to graft every single tree. I think there are, for example, some very large ponderosas that could be in scale. There are every once in a while, like the one seed juniper is not that bad of a foliage. The Western juniper, although it's kind of sticky and a little difficult to work on because of that, I think it can, mound up quite nice and has nice potential to make pads, instruction and whatnot. But in my experience, like most of the junipers in the US, they can be very difficult to maintain properly without wire. So they're always not everything, but 99% of the trees I've seen, even if they've been done very, very well, they never get quite to a point where it's like they can look nice and have very refined, full aesthetically pleasing structure without wire. There are the outliers, of course, but I think generally speaking, grafting with something like the Japanese Shimpaku varieties, you're going to make a more structurally stable design in a quicker time frame that is going to improve with basically less effort. That's the way I look at it.
Mm.
A nice Itogawa or Kishu juniper, if it's grafted onto a piece of Yamadori material or something like that, as long as you set the bones or the base framework, the tree is essentially going to grow itself into that design. You can do that initial wiring 3, 4 years after you graft it, set everything where it needs to be, and a lot of the rest of the work is just growing and cutting at the necessary times and letting it, fill out and make structure. Whereas, like with something like a Rocky Mountain juniper or many of the other collected junipers in the US, that can't really be said. So if I can make a nicer tree in less amount of time, it's slightly more pest resistant depending on what part of the US you're in, I'm going to go with that. I think it's
Hmm.
an easy choice for me. Some people might not agree with that, but part of that definitely is like just a reflection of I trained in Japan. My aesthetics for what's beautiful and what bonsai is. Granted, bonsai is a Japanese practice, so I prefer to practice it the way I was taught. It reflects that time spent in Japan. So I think someone who's not spent that same amount of time is probably going to hold like a slightly different opinion on it. But yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, that's kind of how I feel about it. I'm all for grafting most of the native species. I don't think you need to graft everything, but especially if you have something that has ridiculously leggy branching, but has nice features, on something like a juniper closer into the trunk, you're gonna have to do either bending or grafting, and sometimes the bending will make for an aesthetically pleasing design, but not always. And if it's easier to just graft something in and kind of, pick your ideal branch placement and whatnot, I think that's kind of the obvious choice for me at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think there's definitely aspects of it. I can see both kind of sides of the coin. It's a little bit different than in Japan in that like you're grafting a native foliage on a native tree there, right? As opposed to in the US, it's like you're changing the character of the tree, right? Taking it from, a native foliage
Hmm.
that is representative of people's experiences in nature to something that's, not native, right? I think that like emotional aspect of that sometimes gets to
Yeah.
people. Not that that should, and that can be a great reason or it can be a poor reason, right? Depending on what your goals are for the tree. But I think that's why it maybe has a little bit more of like a charge to it than
Yeah, I
in
mean,
than in
I
Japan.
think it's kind of both and neither at the same time. Like yes, it doesn't matter, but definitely there is some emotional aspect, I guess. Not for me at least, but for some people I can see that, grafting it with something that is foreign in nature and isn't naturally found in the US at least. So yeah, there definitely is that. I mean, you could try and go out and find the best Rocky Mountain juniper foliage or best Western juniper foliage and graft that onto all the native trees, I guess. But that also feels kind of strange to me because it's like if we do that, are you going to graft like a nice rocky foliage onto Western? Or are you going to graft like a nice rocky onto Sierra? Or how would that?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
It seems like a lot of extra work to accomplish something that can already be done with the Japanese species, at least. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
But it's an
Well,
interesting
yeah.
idea to ponder, at least, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is very impressive whenever you see a native foliage in like a high degree of refinement, even if it doesn't have the exact same density or look as a Japanese cultivar. It can still be like it's still like a testament to wow, somebody like really knew their stuff to be able to handle this foliage and get it to that level of refinement. Now you don't see that very often, but I at least am very
When
impressed when I see that in exhibitions because I know how difficult it is.
I think so, yeah. It's definitely impressive and it can look good. I think it's just the sustainability of those foliage types, like always having to be kind of dependent on wire to have them cleaned up where to the point where you want them to be. It just feels like a lot of extra unnecessary work that
Yeah,
could be spent further enhancing the tree otherwise.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. Like I'm looking forward to. I take more of a kind of both approach to like if it's a native foliage that I really enjoy and like and it looks proportional for the tree, I might keep it. But I'm also looking forward to improving my grafting skills and like where it's going to make a better tree or a different tree. Like
Yeah.
it aligns with the design better, grafting. So, well, Kaya, it's been a blast talking with you. I really appreciate you kind of giving us a really realistic view of your apprenticeship and your practice, and obviously wishing you all the best success. Can you share with folks like how they can get in touch with you, or what you're open for business in terms of right now, so that folks know if and when they should reach out to you?
Yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to me for various bonsai work or tours in Japan or whatever it may be, you can find me on most social media like Facebook and Instagram at Mooney or Moonlight Bonsai. And if you need to get in touch with me via email, it is moonlightbonsai@yahoo.com. So feel free to get in contact with me through any of those ways, and I'd be happy to help you out.
Can definitely vouch directly for Kaya in terms of both his beautiful work as well as number one tour guide in Japan, Ichiban.
Thanks.
So yeah, really, really had a blast with you last time I was there, and looking forward to seeing you in February.
It's going to be a blast again. Can't wait.
Yeah, thanks, Kaya.
Thank you, Addison.